All right, some of you might know of the posts that I've been putting out. A lot of atomic stuff, and I mean that's what I do. I'm sort of a geek. Well, I'm a geek. Anyway, this is all about electronics and organics and compounds and molecules and bonding and nucleophilic reactions, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. Bond lengths and all this sequestration of metals and transition zones. Anyway, I'm not completely stupid at this stuff. I got some idea what I'm talking about. I've been doing this, as you can see, this paper is so dark that I've been doing it a long time. Anyway, I'm going to just show what I've got to say, and you see. All right, this is bizarre how this stuff has fallen into shape here. This guy David Hudson and this I'm going to call it atomic gold. He found this stuff, I believe, near hot springs, and I've always, and I know this is a fact anyway, and I was going to do another video on geodes. Are bones that have been, hot springs have been thermogeologically have boiled all the stuff out of the soft bone, out of the soft tissue, out of the bone. So you end up with the skeletal remain of it, and it, in the inside has the metals, and the metals start to crystallize. But when the percolates went through there and everything later, but it's all built around the fact that it was inside of geologically hot springs. You know, it just boiled it out, and this whole thing is it all just makes sense. It's all processed with pH. And the time, oh, anyway, it's crazy. It's crazy. All right, this is right off the web. This is what they call Electrum. And Electrum is, you know, you look at it, you think it's gold. Well, it's what I believe it's called the platinum group, and it has gold and silver and platinum and some other metals in there. And metals remain in the body after the organic material in creatures sublimates off, creating methanes and gases and oils and things like that. It's all the gooey stuff. And what you end up with is metals, and the heavier elements are left over, and they create little holes here and there where the sublimated material has evaporated out. You know, think of it evaporation, sublimation, same thing. Anyway, all of that stuff goes out according to how deep and how long and how the temperature and all of this business. Now, when you get to this was a living creature, and you see that hole? That was a blood vessel. 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 Those were places where blood was coming. And what is ended up, all of the gaseous emissions went out of here, and it ended up leaving metals. And that's just the way it works. They're in the blood. Now, that's why these little fibers are here. This quartz here is the end result. Quartz crystals is a crystalline structure that's formed as the material of the body crystallizes. And it crystallizes as the percolates go through there, and primarily you end up with OH minus being the last molecule that can penetrate into the deep recesses of mud fossils. And this would have been a mud fossil. This was not stripped bone out there. This was buried deep, and it had a lot of flesh on it, and it was coated with silicon, which is your flesh, you know, a creature's flesh, and it's 50 times more there than everywhere else, and that creates silicon dioxide. It coats it, it plates it, it restricts all the evasion of chemicals, and you end up with only OH minus, which is one of the smallest molecules there is able to wiggle through there. That's just the way it works. And it ends up getting in here, and it creates quartz. Quartz is SiO2, SiO4, that type of stuff. It's these are amorphous quartz. It's just the way it works, and they turn into crystals where there's vugs and holes where the volatile organics have precipitated out. It's just how it works, and that's what I call the my theory of what do I call it now. Life is the cradle of crystallization. All right. That's what it is, and that's how it works. That's how these crystals are formed, and they're formed by particulates. And you know, I have a whole paper on this. I have all kinds of documentation on this, and I've recreated a process in the laboratory. It's done because of this electricity. There's electricity in the soils. They don't even never consider this. Electricity in the soils drives ionic matter into other ionic matter, so you have crystals colliding with crystals, and there's nothing more ionic than a creature's body. And that is the whole process, and that's, they're just not paying attention to that electrical factor. All right, on the Manna, what we want to show is that this guy, David Hudson, I think it's David Hudson, he's right. He's got some, looks like he's got evidence to me. And here's what I'm saying is happening. He's finding this white powder, and then he's got a lot of minerals in there, which are the gold group minerals, the platinum group minerals. Now, this is a geode. Now, they say this is just something in the ground and it turned like this because of geological things happened to it. Well, no. This was a bone. This was a bone. And that was a vein. That was a vein. That's the literal outside of the vein, which is extremely protective of the contents. And this is the inside of the blood and all that. And it's extremely apparent when you look at it closely. This is the hard bone, and it's turned dark now, but that's the outside structure of the hard bone. There's some black here. Okay, this right here is bone black. It's a fully understood thing. This kind of black comes out from the ferritins, the ferrous oxides. There's Fe2s and Fe3s. I can't remember which ones. I think one's black, one's red. Anyway, it has both of those, and this always comes out from bones. Now, the contents, though, here's the key. Listen to this carefully, because the contents of the head of a bone contains a spongy bone. Now, in that spongy bone, you have a lot of the building blocks of blood and things. And you have metals. There's metals in there. Now, when you die and everything blows out of your body, tiny little metals stay in there because they don't vaporize out the way everything else does. It's called sublimation, but it's just like vaporizing. So the organic gooey stuff goes away, but the metals, they much higher vaporation. Anyway, so you end up with metals. Metals are what creates the seeds inside these things, because there's a hole in there after you boil out all the contents of those metals. All right, do you understand what I'm getting at now? These bones and these vugs that contain these crystals are hollow bones. Now, how did they get hollow? My contention is that these bones are from geologically active areas where there was a lot of hot springs. And that's exactly what he said. This is in a hot spring area. Now, what would happen? It would boil the contents of the soft stuff in the bone on the inside and leave the crust on the outside to fill up with particulates that percolated down through the soil, which creates the crystals inside these holes. And the crystals are just an absolute natural process of the metal seeds remaining after the other stuff was boiled away. So now, there's some metal seeds left, but there's a lot of that contents was boiled away. So what does this guy find? He finds white powder. Now, white powder, why would you think that that's anything? Well, when you boil down bones and things like that and you have calcium and all that stuff left over, you end up with white powder on the bottom of your pans. Well, this is white powder that's leached out from these bones through several processes, one of which I would say was volcanism, all right, boiling them. The second is up here. And this is a process of pH, and everything in the body is controlled by pHs. When you absorb things and you put them in your stomach, they get acid, and that breaks the bonds and it's called chelation of metals and things like that that come in, and they dechelate them. They cut the bonds, they crack the bonds. They call it cracking bonds, and the acids with these ions crack the bonds and liberate the things so that we can absorb them in our body. And something happens in the body, and there's a paper 1968 by Schrade, I believe it was, about hydrochloric acid and its effects on iron absorption in the body. Absolute fabulous paper, not a hard read either. Now, And they came up with some interesting findings about why it doesn't chelate again, why it does these metals do not resequester themselves when they enter the digestive system. It's interesting. You can go look it up if you want. Anyway, let's get back to this. Now, somebody said if it totally dried out, it gets magnesium. Now, I don't know about that. That's something for people to think about. Now, the atomic gold, the atomic white is a color, is a glow of white that is I believe unnatural, and I'm going to show you some evidence about that. And magnesium and hydrogen, they're extremely high energy atomic molecules, and they produce atomic white colors. And we literally are energy ourselves. We are nothing but everything. We're exactly the same as these rocks, exactly the same as this board here, identical substance when you get down to the components. All right. Now, ions are the electrical charges. There's positive ions, negative ions. Usually they're electrons, but in the case of hydrogen, an ion is hydrogen atom. I mean, it's the proton. You end up with a hydrogen proton. So now you have a hydrogen proton, which is an ion. This changes things in my mind, because I don't normally think of them that way. But all you have is a negative and a positive, so when you strip away the negative, you end up with a positive, and that's a proton. That's 1,800 times more massive than an electron. And we live, apparently, on protons, on these protons that are being absorbed into our system. That's our food. They say, oh, you got glucose, this and that. Well, of course, but when you get down to the end, how do you use all that stuff? Well, you break it down into its components, and it's broken down into a solution of hydrogen protons, and then they are fed down into another little soupy area here that has a few of them, and that's what creates, I think it's ATP, I believe is the molecule that it creates. But you need these components to build that molecule. Now, if you had such an extremely dense amount of that material liberated inside of you by this monatomic principle, that would be the food. That's food. I mean, it is food. At the bottom line, you're looking for protons. I don't care where they come from. If you can get them where they're supposed to be, and they're in the form of a proton with no electron, you got food. And that's what I'm saying is happening. And he's talking about hot springs. He's talking about weight changing and gravity, and I do understand a little bit about atoms, and I think he's 100% correct in what he's saying. And I believe that it's because of the transition metals having different valence shells that have ability to take on. They can bond in the different shells in there. Usually they only bond in the top shell. These can bond in more than one shell. Think about it that way. So what that does is it leaves you like ability to sort of shift around, and they call them transition metals, and this is exactly what he's dealing with. And then when you heat those transition materials, you get electronic transitions, and you get these spikes and jumps and things that he's seeing. Now somehow he's doing something else, and I'm sort of looking into it deeper here because there's more going on here than I can absorb. But there's something to do with this continuous reheating and forcing these states that are not normal. And my feeling now is that what he has done is created molecules or atoms or however it is that have energy states, quantums, that are not normally associated with the normal elements. And because they're in this transitional phase of not being where they're supposed to be and staying there somehow, now I can't account for some of this, but this is what I'm seeing and this is what I'm thinking. And somehow they're staying in this transition phase, and that increases the frequency of the light that they give off. So instead of being red, it's just shifting up a little higher. So at any rate, instead of having only a big high energy frequency at the very end, all of the frequencies of light coming from this particular type of substance seem to be altered to enhance the whiteness, like a brilliant frequency white. And it is something strange about this frequency of white. And when I look at it, I can't put my finger on it yet, but I don't have the equipment to test this stuff. I'm just doing it with my eyeballs. So anyway, if anybody's got any equipment, we could use it. All right, so that's what I'm coming up with so far. Larry, I'm doing the best I can, buddy. I'm going to go working deep into this molecular stuff. Very, very interesting. Thank you for the tip. All right, bye. All right. When you have metals, and this is what we're talking about is metals, they become what they call chelated and sequestered, and there's certain places in them that are like these little magnetic poles that attach to other, what they call ligands, which encircle the central atom. And these are, I'll say kind of generic. They encircle the central metal, and they keep it from, like this guy said, water ran off, all these things, nothing would work, couldn't get into the center, or yada yada yada. Well, what does break these bonds is acids. You know, acids and bases and so forth. Depends on what the architecture there is, whether there's extra pluses or minuses. Well, anyway, these right here, you see this? Acidic, chlorides, HCl gases, okay, and then you got sodium, sea salts, and all this business. It's a chemical soup. So any bones and things that are in this particular area are going to get literally leached with these kind of chemicals, acids and ions, and they are going to remove the metals from, and especially if they're in a hot condition like boiling, you know, thermal springs. And then the precipitants of the boiling, just like in a pan, it collects somewhere. These are going to do the exact same thing. And when I saw the white stuff the guy was scraping up in a couple of videos, it looks just like the stuff you scrape off a pan if you got a lot of calcium in your house. It's just one of those things. It looks exactly like that to me.